Hi, I'm Brett Davidson. I'm President and CEO of Wavefront, and I'm here to talk to you about Powerwave. Today we're going to be talking about increasing the size of the prize or revitalizing water floods or CO2 floods. Let's talk about Powerwave for a second. Powerwave is a technology that was developed by a fellow named Dr. Tim Spanos, a theoretician at the University of Alberta, Maurice Dussault at the University of Waterloo, and myself. Why would you want to use Powerwave in your operations? Well, first and foremost, high production upside. We can provide you greater production value, i.e. increasing your daily production on a single well by 25 or 200%. 2, significant reserves growth. We're looking at increasing your reserves from, let's say, 35% to 45% to 50%. 3, rapid payback. We get back your money in a 2 to 10 month period. And 4, high return on investment. Typically, all of our customers have a return on investment greater than 100%. Well, as you can see on the map, we have technology Powerwave use in Canada, United States, Mexico, Argentina. We'll have it down in Brazil coming soon. We have it over in Australia. We have it over in Oman. Now let's look at Powerwave and the action of the tool. So what's actually happening when we're doing this optimization technique? And let's remember, it is an optimization technique. We're not asking you to change any of your downhole infrastructure other than to put in this tool. So what this tool is doing essentially is oscillating your fluid on and off. You can think of it as a light switch. Off means there's no flow, on means there is flow. So what you're seeing here with that oscillation of the fluid is a pressure pulse. Again, what we're doing is oscillating the flow on and off, creating a pressure pulse that's going to have very beneficial effects in the reservoir. Now what happens when we do that? Well, let's look at what happens when we don't do that. So if we're not oscillating the flow on and off, what happens is the fluid will take the path of least resistance. So if you're looking at this chart here, this view graph of this cell where you have orange, dark orange and light orange, the dark orange is the stranded oil. The light orange, or the clearer material, is swept oil. And what happens in this case is the water enters the test cell, finds its path of least resistance. That path of least resistance then cleans out or sweeps out that oil, leaving behind the darker orange, which is just stranded oil. So in this case, we're not having an effective broom, if you will, of the reservoir. We're leaving reserves behind. Now let's take a look at that from a side-by-side comparison. Here on the left-hand side, we have a view graph. That's a cell containing oil that's been dyed yellow with a light oil in it. The black material is water. It's been dyed black for the sake of the video. You notice the time scale of 139 seconds. You notice as we're flooding this with just standard pressure, you have these paths of least resistance, these flow channels, or these fingers. And that is what's coursing to your reservoir. Everything between that is where your stranded oil. On your right-hand side, same time frame, 139 seconds, you see that water has been coursed all the way through the test cell. And we have many, many more flow channels. That means we have better sweep efficiency. So the benefit of Powerwave is that you get better contact with the reservoir. Better contact with the reservoir means you have more produced reserves, which means you have a greater asset value. Okay, here we're going to demonstrate in the lab what the difference is between normal injection and Powerwave injection. And we're going to use 2 case examples. The case example of strict water, the case example of water combined with Powerwave. So let's look at the green line. The green line represents a simple water flood. In that simple water flood, no Powerwave involved, no pulsed injection involved. After 1 pour volume, you're going to get about 7.5% recovery. Now we're going to switch over and inject that water with Powerwave. As you can see, we have greater recovery. At the 1 pour volume, we have about 16% recovery. So we go from about 7.5% to 16%, which is a large increase in recoverable reserves. Now let's take a look again at the next line, the blue line. The blue line is now a surfactant flood. A surfactant flood being where we're just going to add that surfactant under a normal pressure gradient. You can see at 1 pour volume that the recovery is a little bit less than Powerwave. So one could say that you could use Powerwave on its own without the advent of adding a chemical, which adds additional cost to your operations. Now, what happens when you combine Powerwave with the surfactant? And let's follow the red line. We can see at 1 pour volume, we're looking at about 25% recoverable reserves from this test cell. Now, what that means is that for your largest bang for your dollar, a combination of Powerwave with a surfactant will yield you the greatest recovery. So what do you expect from Powerwave? When we talk about technology expectations, we're talking about what we have garnered in the time that we've used Powerwave with different customers. So we know that, for instance, within 4 to 12 months, you would expect a 25 to 200% increase in productivity on an individual well basis. We know that greater than 12 months, you can expect an increase of greater than 25% on your pattern. And over the long term, which is what we're really looking at, we're looking at reserves over the long term, we're looking at extending field life, we're looking at a 2 to 5% increase in recovery factor, and that's for the most homogeneous reservoir. As we get to more heterogeneous reservoirs, we're going to be looking at a 10 to 15% increase in recovery factor. What everybody asks me is, how much does this cost? Can I buy tools? How do I access this technology? Well, first and foremost, we have a rental model. The rental model says you're going to pay a rental charge of $3,000 a month per injector for the use of our technology. So what we provide you is a license to use our technology and a downhole means which to practice that. So if I'm looking strictly from a netback, if I have a netback of $45 on a typical 5-spot pattern, I'd need 3.29 barrels a day collectively over those wells in order to break even on the rental. So it's a very inexpensive use of technology to have a big upside. I have 5 examples here from Western Canada. So we can take a look at the field, the months installed, the base decline, the oil rate with Powerwave, the percent increase, the netback, etc. In all cases, you'll see that the rate of return on investment was greater than 100%. Time to get that return on investment ranged between 2 and 11 months. But you can also see that, generally speaking, we're having large percentages increases in production. And I said earlier that we might get 25 to 200%. In this particular case, the lowest one we have is about 55%. The highest one is around 270%. Yes, a wide range in standard deviation, but as we can see, the Powerwave has brought results to many different types of reservoirs. Often people talk to us and say, well, we don't want to rent your tool because it adds to our operating costs, and we're charged with decreasing our operating costs by our management. Well, I want to say to you today that Powerwave doesn't increase your operating costs. It actually, on a per barrel basis, decreases your operating costs. If you take a look at this graph from Triaxon, it's showing you that on a per barrel basis, Powerwave actually saved Triaxon $5.15 per barrel produced. Basically, we have 2 types of installations presently. We have a wireline installation and we have a electrical tubing installation. From the wireline installation, it's $12,000 to $15,000 to install. You optimize that using acoustics on the wellhead. This is the simplest form of the technology deployment. As we get a little bit more complicated, we end up having a tubing deployed tool, which is an electrical tool. It's a solenoid that opens and closes. You tell that solenoid to open and close based upon a computer at surface. The cost for installation here is $25,000 to $40,000. The reasoning obviously is you have to remove all the jewelry from the well and run it back in. Many operators say, well, our reservoir is different, and we have that mentality that the physics is different. So we've used Powerwave with sandstones, carbonates, dolomites, a whole host of different rock types, both in the environmental and in the oil industry. A lot of different gravity oils as well, from 14 to 42 API gravity. So what we say at Wavefront is Powerwave is universally applicable. It's the tool that you use that's important. And we're here to tell you what tool you use for your specific reservoir. So let's take a look at some highlights or some case histories. And the first case history we have is from Wainwright, Alberta. This is our longest running case history, starting in September 2007. This client was our first large commercial client. You see those 3 wells marked Powerwave 1, Powerwave 2, Powerwave 3. The green dots around the periphery are the wells that we're monitoring for production. The other blue dots are other water injector wells in the field. Here, starting in July 08, is the 2-year history up to the tools were installed. And you can see the red line deviating down the graph will show you that Powerwave had about a 3.4% exponential decline per month. Where you see the vertical green, blue, and red lines is where Powerwave tools were installed. And as you can see, there's a green line associated with that installs where we have an uptrend in production, where now you're on an incline about 1.3% a month. Now we get to the pink vertical line. The pink vertical line is where we had some negative impact, the interruption of a number of Powerwave tools. And you can see it doesn't immediately happen after the tools are stopped. There's a time lag, because remember, we've done all of these wonderful things in the reservoir. We've redistributed flow, and that's going to take a while for Mother Nature to work itself out. But when it does, you can see somewhere around August of 2011, you have a steep crash in production. So what that says to you is that Powerwave was giving me all this benefit, and when Powerwave wasn't there, the production crashed. This is further shows an example here. If we're trailing the curve, which is the yellow square dots, and that's a green line, you can see it's coming down. When Powerwave's not in use, we put Powerwave in. It starts to incline when Powerwave is in use. When Powerwave's not in use again, it starts to crash. And you can see that very well on the graph. Well, what we expect to see is a positive change in your oil cut. Oil cut on a per barrel basis. January 09, you start having a downward trend in your oil cut. You start putting the Powerwave tools in, your oil cut stabilizes and then starts coming up. But lo and behold, again, when you get to the pink line, when Powerwave is interrupted, you have a little time lag, but then your oil cut crashes. So in this particular case, the operator has essentially lost millions of dollars in extra production. Let's take another example here from Colville, Saskatchewan. These wells are all equipped with Powerwave tools. Next, please. Here again, you can see the red decline curve. Some really change in mountainous looking peaks with the individual production on those patterns. But you can see actually decline has been slowing down again, which is positive. Next graph, please. And here you can see again, the blue line represents the oil cut decline. The vertical line represents when Powerwave tools were installed. And you have starting upward trend of oil cut. As I said before, we measure ourselves on oil cut. And if we're having benefit, we're going to see this in all of our projects. Here is a 6-well pilot. Again, it's a low permeability formation, high gravity oil. You can again see a nice established decline. Vertical lines and when Powerwave tools were installed, and we have a nice incline in production. Though not as prevalent as the other curves, you can see that there is a fluctuation in the oil cut, and their benefit too did come from oil cut. This is an example from Taber, Alberta. In Taber, Alberta, we have a 4-well pilot here, and we've used some variations of the tools. You can see in pattern 3 here, we've actually used a Voyager and a Dragonfly throughout the part of this test program. The other tools have remained consistent throughout, but pattern 3 had a change. Go ahead. Here again, a nice decline before Powerwave tools were installed. You can see an uptick in production, and now a new established decline curve, which is now, again, as I said before, we're going to extend field life. And I keep harping on about this. We have a decline in the oil cut, Powerwave tools are installed, we have an uptick in oil cut, and we have a stable oil cut. That stable oil cut is what's going to get you your increased reserves with time. Here we're in Chauvin, Alberta. In Chauvin, we have a 5-well program split into 2 sides of the field. Next, please. Here again, you can see a downward trend of the production, and the tools are installed, and you see an upward tick after a few months, and you have a new decline curve. And again, talking about oil cut, we see oil cut coming down, we see the tools being installed, we see oil cut coming up. And I just want to close out this introductory meeting to Powerwave and say to you that at a very, very small cost, you can get a significant increase in the amount of recoverable reserves by simply changing the way you inject your fluid. So Powerwave is something you can use to improve your asset value today.